Professor Gatinel.
Oui, bonsoir, ça va? Ça va bien?
Bonsoir, bonsoir à Paris.
Bonsoir, bonsoir à Thessalonique, ça va?
Nous avons l'honneur et le plaisir d'avoir parmi nous professeur Damien Gatinel, un vrai gourou sur le sujet de Keratoconus. Merci bien pour avoir accepté notre invitation.
Merci.
Je crois que je suis le seul qui parle français en notre clinique, donc j'arrête. I switch to English and I give the podium to you. It's all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here. And so, as we decided, I think you can launch the pre-recorded video, or you want me to do it? Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
I would like first to thank the organizers for inviting me to present on this very important subject. I have no financial interest in eye rubbing. I wish to thank all my collaborators. In my opinion, excessive eye rubbing is very dangerous because it is the necessary cause of keratoconus and not just an optional risk factor. Eye rubbing is caused by general or local factors, and corneal resistance varies from subject to subject. Keratoconus occurs when the energy delivered by friction exceeds the natural resistance capacities of the cornea. The apparition of a permanent deformation results from the imbalance between the mechanical stress and the resistance properties of the cornea. This conjecture is summarized in the formula no rub, no cone. There are various reasons why patients rub their eyes too much: dry eye, allergies, screen work, and many more. There are also many ways to rub your eyes in terms of style, intensity, and duration. Using the hardest parts of the hands and fingers is certainly more dangerous. Visiting social networks and keratoconus patient groups is very informative. This can lead to awareness of certain things and suggestions for us, eye doctors. While eye rubbing is still reported as a risk factor in the literature for keratoconus, it is also a risk factor for most of other risk factors of keratoconus. This logical fallacy makes eye rubbing a good candidate for a cause and effect relationship to keratoconus. In 1965, the English statistician Sir Austin Bradford Hill proposed a set of 9 criteria to provide epidemiologic evidence of a causal relationship between the presumed cause and the observed effect. That can be useful in establishing epidemiologic evidence of a causal relationship between a presumed cause and an observed effect. Through this presentation, we will see that the hypothesis no rub, no cone satisfies these criteria. As an example, let's focus on the 4th criteria, which is particularly important. When we question patients with keratoconus, we observe that in all cases, rubbing precedes the appearance of keratoconus by months or years. These actions are sometimes neglected or ignored, which explains why a small proportion of patients say they do not rub, at least at the first visit. In our experience, once awareness of possible excessive rubbing is raised, it is acknowledged by nearly 100% of patients during the second visit. This patient realized that he was rubbing his right eye harder, and we can safely assume that this explains the more pronounced character of the corneal deformation on the right. In the same vein, it is therefore tempting, even if a little presumptuous, to think that these articles published in 2016 and 18, respectively, could explain the recent boom in publications devoted to the study of the impact of eye rubbing and its exact responsibility in the genesis of keratoconus. These publications, this article has just appeared, which reviews the genetic versus mechanical causes of keratoconus, and which concludes in the existence of purely mechanical pathologies, but which could coexist with different forms of a genetic origin, which is a paradigmatic reversal if we refer to numbers. The cases of keratoconus are overwhelmingly sporadic. In another recent study, we found that eye rubbing with the knuckles was the most important predictive factor for keratoconus, while the presence of a family history was not significant. Another argument argues in favor of an external factor for the genesis of keratoconus. If keratoconus is genetic, it should always be bilateral. Thus, the existence of truly unilateral forms is debated. Do they really exist? We believe so. Here is an example. The right cornea is affected by keratoconus, but not the left cornea. Negative for all topographical and biomechanical indices of detection. It seems, after almost 15 years of follow-up, that this keratoconus persists in remaining strictly unilateral. This is evidenced by the stability of the score and the differential map over 15 years. Obviously, the existence of strictly unilateral rubbing gives credence to the mechanical hypothesis, all the more so as the stopping of these from 2006 made it possible to stop the progression of the deformation on the right side. Here are 4 genetically identical eyes raised in the same environment, but only one of which has been excessively rubbed. A single case of such twins discrepancy is sufficient to demonstrate the need for external factors. Studies show positive family history in only 6 to 25% of the cases. Of course, there is a genetic dimension in keratoconus, but in our opinion, it is indirect and concerns the degree of corneal resistance or the susceptibility to allergies and all the factors that encourage patients to rub their eyes. The next question should be, why the right eye and not the left eye, or vice versa? We have discovered that in unilateral or very asymmetric forms, the most affected eye is always the most or the only one rubbed, and its side is highly correlated with the side of a stomach sleeping position with prolonged compression of the orbit. Here is an example of a very asymmetrical or even unilateral keratoconus. The picture of the sleeping position was taken by the mother of this patient, who rubbed almost only his right eye. Here is another example, very similar. It is questionable whether this type of keratoconus could only be the consequence of a bad sleeping position, causing chronic eye irritation, and subsequently the need to rub to soothe it. Another important criteria is plausibility. The corneal resistance properties can be reduced by eye rubbing itself, and this is a mechanical route to keratoconus. But various biological mechanisms and enzyme cascades have been described in healthy volunteers who rub their eyes. Indeed, there is also a parallel rubbing-induced biological route to keratoconus. But that's not all. Until today, little was known about what happens to the globe when it is rubbed. We acquired dynamic MRI on a healthy volunteer who was asked to rub his eyes. These images speak for themselves. Chronic eye rubbing is compatible with the focal damage of the apical stroma, where researchers demonstrated, using Brillouin measurements, that biomechanical alterations were primarily concentrated. Beyond the corneal distortion, the movements of the globe, which steps back into the eye socket, are truly impressive. it is not surprising that cases of IOL subluxation, hyphema, glaucoma, and retinal detachment have been attributed to excessive eye rubbing. Here is a case of a chronic eye rubber, which caused a marked focal thinning of the cornea. Careful examination of the irises reveals the presence of a lower depigmentation with delamination of the iris stroma fibers. This condition is called iridoschisis. The very inferior location of the corneal and iris damage is probably linked to the area of impact of the rubbing, which could be the consequence of the gesture and the intensity of the bell phenomenon, in this case, a marked higher rotation of the globe. I have presented extreme and remarkable cases. What is also remarkable with keratoconus and echoes the fifth criteria is that there is a continuum between normal and very deformed corneas, with intermediate situations for which it is difficult to decide, keratoconus or no keratoconus. There may never have been a keratoconus in the sense of a pure genetic affection, but a plethora of topographical patterns conditioned by the severity of the lesions inflicted by external mechanical phenomena, daytime and or nighttime rubbing and compression. In the case of inadvertent topographic discovery of these early forms, rubbing is typically recent or much less vigorous and frequent. This continuum and correlation between gesture and severity of the deformation also vehemently pleads for an external cause. In other words, the extreme variability of the topographic presentation modes of corneal deformation is matched only by the extreme variability of rubbing in duration, intensity, and frequency. In summary, the Norom-Nocone conjecture meets the Bradford-Hill criteria. There is ample evidence that keratoconus requires an interaction with environmental factors to make a genetically determined predisposition manifest as a phenotypically apparent disease. This is where eye rubbing comes into play. We can assemble all these pieces of information to solve the puzzle of the pathophysiology of keratoconus, where eye rubbing, often associated with eye compression related to sleeping position, is a sine qua non. Finally, let us recall that the study of Marfan syndrome teaches us counterfactually that a soft but not rubbed cornea thins and flattens in a homogeneous and non-focal fashion. Therefore, it seems there is no way that the morphological changes seen in keratoconus could appear spontaneously in a weak but non-rubbed cornea. Beyond the academic debate, refusing to admit the causal and essential role of excessive rubbing deprives us of the possibility of halting the progression of the disease or even eradicating it by educating patients at risk, particularly allergic or prone sleepers. I hope I have convinced you of the urgency to completely revise our understanding of keratoconus. Today, our care for keratoconus patients is fully dedicated to making them stop rubbing their eyes, which is not easy and requires a comprehensive approach, but that's another story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damien, for this really complete new theory, which I have followed for the last years, and it's really adding up or clearing a lot of questions that we had in the past for the inflammation, the mechanical causes, and of course, in some unusual cases that we really don't know how to deal with them. I think it's another beautiful box unrevealed in this fantastic puzzle of cross-linking. Dimitri, do you want to add something on that?
You're muted.
Sorry?
Dimitri is muted, I think.
It's muted. Okay. Okay. Anyway.
Now?
Nene?
I think that every specialist that seriously is on the keratoconus subject, the first thing we do in our practice is to ask our patients if they're rubbing their eyes. Even if we accept it as a whole theory or the holistic theory about the origin or not, we do have it in our mind. We always ask our patients if they do it, how they do it, the pattern that they follow. You showed something very interesting about the eye rubbing during the sleep, which is very sometimes it slips us. It slips away. We don't pay attention to that, and we always say to our patients after, no matter if we apply a cross-linking treatment or not, to stop rubbing their eyes. It's very crucial, not only for the progression or not of the disease, but also for the success of the cross-linking treatment.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go.
I think Damien also, I don't know if you can hear me. I think also this adding this extra protection that we have for the inflammatory aspect of keratoconus, and apart from anything else that we're doing, either on cross-linking, rings, or whatever we want to do to formulate a better surface, we have to treat the underlying inflammation, and we have to teach the patients as well to stop or to forbid them somehow giving another cascade of inflammatory reactions from eye rubbing in an eye which is already red, inflamed, but we're missing this picture because we look at the topography first and we're missing a lot of other aspects. I think it's very important to treat the inflammation in keratoconus as well as in dry eye without obviously forgetting all the other aspects that we have to do in this area. And for this, I have to thank you because you made a strong contribution. You raised this voice for many years on that, and it is really very important. Renato, you want to add something on this?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I highly agree with my friend Damien, but I remember when I was in medicine, we learned from the French medicine that la médecine c'est comme l'amour, ni jamais ni toujours. So I do agree that eye rubbing is very important, and it's the main message that we have to conceive to the public. And also I believe that you are right on the inflammation. Farhad Hafezi has done a very nice study on the eye rubbing model in which he pretty much demonstrates that eye rubbing does not weaken the cornea, at least an intense eye rubbing in that intensity that he did. But he was using an ex vivo model. It was no inflammation was involved, and also the temperature of the body, all the factors that are related to the inflammation were not there. So I think it's much more on the quest for the mechanical trauma in terms of the inflammation. But I highly agree, we should focus on what we all know that is very important, that eye rubbing is evil for patients with keratoconus, and eventually stopping eye rubbing will definitely decrease the suffering from the disease in the world.
Great. Yes, I would like also to thank now, and of course at the end again, our sponsor, OPTO Hellas and Avidro, for this fantastic webinar, which will make the next presentation even more interesting because it will link the eye rubbing that we have seen, and we link the keratoconus with the inflammation. So I would like to present Professor Cosimo Mazzotta's lecture, which is videotaped. Unfortunately, he's on his way to Siena, but there is a stuck traffic, I think, somewhere outside Rome, so he cannot listen to us. Hopefully, if he can make it at the end, it will be great, but we have his lecture, and we will continue with that